Am I too old for infinite banking? Anthony, how often do we get that question?
So we get it quite a bit. In fact, as I was telling you earlier, I'm in a Reddit feed for infinite banking, and somebody had asked that question.
Yeah.
Am I too old? And they were 40 years old.
Well, today we're actually going to go through and we are going to look at if somebody is too old. We're going to look at values when somebody's 20, 40, and 60 years old, and we're going to answer the question, are you too old for infinite banking?
Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to the Infinite Wealth Podcast, where we teach clients how to build wealth and create passive income without the risk of Wall Street.
Welcome to the Infinite Wealth Podcast. I'm Cameron Christensen, along with our co-host Anthony Faso. And today we're going to be talking about, are you too old for infinite banking? Anthony, you shared earlier that you had a question on a Reddit thread, right? Tell us a little bit about that first.
Well, one thing I responded in there, Nelson Nash, the founder and creator of the infinite banking concept, didn't discover this till he was 52.
Yeah.
Right? And my question is, Cameron, why do you think that comes up?
I think it comes up. My belief is that people have a good understanding of insurance when they approach it from the death benefit side. And as you age, if you're buying a certain amount of death benefit, your premiums do increase, right? So that is a valid understanding of kind of how insurance and premiums work. But what we're going to talk about today is the infinite banking concept approach, and the way that we design policies really minimizes that effect on the cash value of a policy.
Yeah, it's very different. I mean, we're cash value focused, not death benefit focused, right? So, Karen, why don't you explain how we determine the death benefit or the premium, the way that we design it?
Yeah, the way that we design it, we're approaching an insurance policy as kind of our cash management tool. We're not solving for death benefit. So what we're working with somebody on is, hey, what do we save in a month? How much cash do we have on hand? And those are kind of the fixed amounts. And then what we're doing is we're designing a policy to certain proportions, right? And then what happens is the death benefit becomes the variable. And so the premiums are consistent, the variable, the death benefit will change depending on the amount. And so our focus, again, is just going to be the cash value piece.
Yeah, and I think this also relates to health. Right? Because people think, well, I'm not as healthy as I want to be, so the premiums are going to be higher. But Cameron, from what you're telling me, who decides the premiums?
The client.
Yeah, it's kind of in summary, I say you decide the premiums, insurance company decides the death benefit.
Yeah.
Right?
I like that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I've never heard you say that before.
It's just a very opposite approach from typical financial planning.
Very.
Right? They're typically solving for death benefit, backing in to the premium. We're solving for cash. We're backing into the death benefit.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I like to say that we say constantly is that we did the math, right? And surprisingly, this time you did the math.
I did do the math.
Which is impressive. And that's why you're going to see the spreadsheet looks prettier than all the ones that I did. So
it does look good.
What we're going to do, so Cameron, why don't you tell us what you had prepared?
Yeah. Oftentimes when somebody's asking about kind of policies and putting it on, who they should put it on, right? Maybe they're a little bit older and they automatically almost always go to like their kids. Hey, if I put a policy on my kids, it's going to be cheaper, right? And so what we've done is I've just picked a 20-year-old, a 40-year-old, and a 60-year-old, and I designed the policies the exact same. I copied and pasted the cash values and the death benefits onto the spreadsheet from our software. It is nothing special, right? It's a 35% base policy, 65% going into the PUA, and that's it. I ran it out over a 20-year period. So what we're going to do is we're going to look and see how these three policies perform over a 10-year period, and then we're also going to extend it out to a 20-year period.
Okay, now this podcast will be on YouTube.
Yeah.
So if you watch the video, you can be able to see the visual of the numbers, but we're not going to get too detailed. So we're going to talk at a high level.
Yeah,
so hopefully, if you're driving or at the gym, you can follow along.
We'll go through it pretty quick, and you'll see some of the patterns here pretty quickly as we go through this. So,
okay. So Cameron, at first, what we're looking at, let's look at year one.
Yep. Year one, we've got $10,000 of premium that's going in for the 20, the 40, and the 60-year-old. And I'm going to highlight the cash values here.
Okay.
I was surprised, right, at cash values. Anthony, if you were to guess, or maybe at the listeners. Let's ask the listeners, right? Because you've seen the answers, right? You're cheating.
Well, no, but honestly, I remember when we did part of the first training we did with Infinite Banking,
Yeah.
if you remember, that they had us do policies on different ages
Yeah.
to analyze it. So I already knew the answer, but I'm glad you did this so you could get refreshed.
Thanks. Right. So if you guys are driving, right, what do you think if we were to put a policy on a 20-year-old, 40, and a 60-year-old, who's going to have the best cash value in year number one? Right. Take a minute, think about that. And let's go and take a look at this. In year number one, for the 20-year-old, they've got $6,456 of cash value. The 40-year-old has $6,677 of cash value. And the 60-year-old, surprisingly, has $6,813 of cash value. Man.
So which one's the highest?
Well, I'm glad you asked. It's going to be the 60-year-old. The 60-year-old has $6,800 of cash value that's available year one in this example.
Well, it's like, let's stop and think about that. Because you're right. Most people are going to think the 20-year-old has more cash value, but that's not the case.
That's not the case. The difference is what I was going to touch on next. It's actually the death benefits.
Okay.
If we look at the death benefits, right, if we go to the 20-year-old, the death benefit that they have is $780,000 of death benefit. The 40-year-old has almost half, $380,000 of death benefit. And the 60-year-old almost has half of that, $150,000 of death benefit. So again, this is what we alluded to earlier, is that, right, the premiums, the cash values are going to be roughly the same, but that death benefit is going to be the biggest variable, right, depending upon age.
Yeah, I thought that this was very interesting. I would expected them, and the way I kind of explain it, it's about the same.
About the
right?
same.
I mean,
cash values?
The cash values going to be very close, and the gap between the difference is, I would say, within a margin of error, so it's pretty close. But I think it's cool that the 60-year-old has more cash value, and just like you said, the reason being is because there's less death benefit. So, I mean, there is a cost of insurance. But the cost of insurance on $150,000 versus, say, $750,000 is going to be much less.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So year one,
Year one 6-year-old wins.
They win, but it's still close.
Yeah.
Right? It's super close, right? So, all right, let's take a look at year 10.
Let's go to year 10. Year 10, the 20-year-old has $108,000 in cash value. The 40-year-old has $112,000 in cash value, and the 60-year-old has $109,000 in cash value. I was surprised. The 6-year-old ranked second, right? The 20-year-old is in last place, and the 40-year-old has accumulated the most cash value over the first 10 years. Again, in this example, pretty impressive.
Okay, I would have expected them to be similar, right? Which is where they are, but really, I to be honest, I would have thought the 6-year-old would have been, the race would have been close. The 6-year-old would have been in third place.
Yeah,
but they're actually in second, which I think is very interesting. And so let's expand.
Let me touch on death benefits real quick while you're expanding. Is that, just to be thorough here, right? We do have an increasing death benefit on all three of these policies in this scenario. At year 10, the 20-year-old has just over $1 million, $1,081,000 a death benefit. The 40-year-old policy death benefit is increased to $566,000, and the 60-year-old is increased to $265,000.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting as well. And again, I think you're making a valid point. Oftentimes we so focus on cash value, but death benefit has a purpose, and here that death benefit almost doubled on the 60-year-old.
Yeah,
which I think is pretty cool. All right,
let's take this down. Let's look at year 20. right? Anthony, right? If you guys have listened to us or ever met with us, right? Anthony and I aren't too comfortable making predictions that out past 20 years, right?
Yeah, even 10's a little, but I'm with you.
20 years is kind of like, well. But anyways, we're going to look at year 20, right? And year 20 for the 20-year-old, we've got $303,000 of cash value. The 40-year-old has $310,000 in cash value, and the 60-year-old has $290,000 of cash value.
Starting to see a little separation.
Little separation, absolutely. First thing I did, Anthony, is actually was looking at like the percentages.
Mm-hmm.
The 290 into the 40-year-old, right?
Mhm.
I think that ended up being like 95%.
Yeah.
Very, very close. Like when you look at it in the big picture of things, right?
So the difference is within 5%.
Yeah.
Which again, there's going to be a little difference in the long run, but in the immediate short run, the 60-year-old has more cash.
6-year-old, yeah, absolutely. The death benefits, just to wrap it up, the 20-year-old has $1.4 million. Death benefit on the 40-year-old, $790,000.
Mm-hmm.
And the 60-year-old has now risen to just over $417,000 in death benefit.
A couple things I would say on here. So, all right, we're starting with 60, 20 years later,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're 60 years old, odds are you have more capacity to put money into premiums, would you say? I mean, particularly compared to a 20-year-old.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
absolutely.
So maybe that 20-year-old's putting in 10. If you're a 60-year-old, in theory, if you were able to put 10 grand in when you were 20, I don't know what that number is, but
10 grand in a month when you're 60.
yeah, but you have the capacity to put in much more.
Yeah.
Right. And with infinite banking, we like to say this isn't an either or, that this is an and. So, what I would expect, that 60-year-old could dump money in there, turn around and buy an asset.
Yeah.
Right. And have that asset repay. I mean, for example, even if we, I know we commonly use a rental property, but you use that down payment, you can typically repay that in 10 to 11 years.
Yeah.
So in theory, they could start using IBC sooner to buy some assets. And I think that would offset the small difference in 20 years. Not to mention, now their death benefit is almost $500,000,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they're 79 years old,
Yeah.
and that's permanent death benefit, right? So
The summary the takeaway that I had, I was actually surprised, like looking at this. I was surprised that the 20-year-old was never had the best cash value in any of these scenarios. Right? The 60-year-old was better in year one, and then the 40-year-old was better at, the 10 and the 20-year benchmark, and that was a surprise to me.
yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
So from this, what I would say is, man, most of the time people are asking, hey, am I too old? Right? They're late 50s, maybe early 60s, and the answer is absolutely not. The stock response that I've given somebody up until this point has been, hey, you're going to have probably 97, 98% of the cash value of a 20-year-old, right? So if you start a policy at 20 versus 60 and you run that out over 20 years, you're at 95, 96% of the cash value that the 20-year-old would have, right? Now I need to start comparing it to the 40-year-old because they've got the better cash value, right? So, great point. Anthony, I've got a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So we've looked at the numbers here. Anthony, do you think that there is an age in which when you do become too old to consider infinite banking? Which I think is most people are kind of asking, right?
Yeah. Well, I would say my first reaction is you're never too old for IBC.
Okay.
What the question is, who do you put the policy on? Right? Because you could be 80 years old and, let me step back. When we're kind of looking at this, it seems that, there's going to be a certain point when you're getting a whole life where you're starting to bet against the insurance company.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's going to be a point where maybe using that cash value is not going to be as efficient. So But and what that age is, I think it's going to depend on many things. If we are, I think the oldest. I mean, I know I recently did a policy on a 67-year-old, right? And in his situation, he had a windfall. So we had this windfall of money, and we did a one and done, and that's a very efficient policy. And so it makes it even more efficient when somebody is older.
Mm-hmm.
So that made sense in that case. But I think when we're over 70, then it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. We kind of need to evaluate how important the death benefit is on that individual, or looking at putting a policy on our children.
Mm-hmm. Typically adult children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add on that?
No, I totally agree. That's kind of the range, right? That 70-year to 75-year range.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've talked about this before. I think the oldest that I've put a policy on somebody is 72, 73. And so kind of right in there, right? You start to go on a case-by-case basis. So I agree with what you said, surprisingly.
Yeah. Well, and then it gets to be, again, if it's a death benefit play, maybe a different type of life insurance is going to be best for that. And that's why it's a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, totally agree. And Anthony, as we were going through that piece, I noticed that the death benefit on the 60-year-old started at 150 and it rose to 450, almost 500,000. And you'd made a point to kind of point that out a few times. Most of the gurus say that we don't need death benefit as we hit a certain age, 60, 65. Would you agree with that?
No, I think they are flat out wrong.
Ooh, okay.
And I would say it gets even more important as we get older.
Why? Okay. Why would you say that?
There's many reasons. Okay.
Give me two.
I'm going to give you more. I'm going to give you as many as I can think of right now. Okay. But, one thing we got to realize is we get older, our overhead gets higher.
Yeah.
Right now, as we get older, we have kids in college.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And your expenses are higher. I know my first mortgage payment was about $1,300.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've flipped those. Instead of being $1,300, it's $3,100. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, my car payment.
Yeah.
We're just starting out is maybe $250, $250 a month. Now it's $1,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So as we get older, and even like our vacations are more elaborate.
Yeah.
When we're just starting out, we're just packing everybody in the car, making some lunches, right, and driving somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right. As we get older, now my vacations are, I want my kids to hang out with me. So we're bringing the kids. One time we even bring the dogs, right? And so maybe now we're flying. So our overhead is a lot more. And for me, I want to make sure that my family can, particularly my wife, can maintain the same lifestyle.
Okay.
Right. And so I need to make sure that she has the death benefits to do that. And in part, selfishly, I don't want her to marry somebody because of money.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I want her to be in a position, hopefully she'd be like, man, nobody can ever replace Anthony. Right. And so she'll die an old maid. Right.
Anthony who?
Well, she's got this $1 million. Right. But in addition, there's a lot of advantage. I think again, I'm talking about maybe more when we're in our 50s and 60s, but as we get a little bit older, again, that death benefit becomes important. And this is one thing that I learned from the CPA world, from actually preparing taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't hear it in the course, didn't hear it in CPA school, but here's something that I think a lot of people don't understand or don't realize, is that when a married couple, when one person dies, they're gonna, assuming they're getting 2 Social Security checks, we're gonna lose the smallest one. Okay, so you keep the largest one. All right, so maybe our income just went down $1,500 to $2,000 a month. So maybe we lost $20,000 a year. Okay, but also we're single. We're no longer filing as married. So that is a big difference that a lot of people don't realize. For example, I'm gonna get a little nerdy here, which I know that you love. You love it when I do that, right?
Just wake me up when you're done.
But the standard deduction when you're married is $32,000, and Cameron, the standard deduction. That means the first $32,000 of taxable income, you don't have to pay taxes on it.
Oh, good to know. Good to know.
Now, if you're single, it's $15,000. So right off the bat, there's $17,000 that is before was tax free, now is taxable, and to make it worse, the tax brackets in essence are about double for somebody who is single.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you have $80,000 of taxable income and you're filing married, tax bracket's 12%. Now you make that same $80,000 and you're single, you're paying 22%. So we're in a higher tax bracket, and remember, we lost about $20,000 or so of income.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's also put on that you're mourning the loss of your spouse.
Yeah.
And then we add these financial salts in the wound. Well, you know what? That death benefit can help alleviate some of those financial burdens, to have that money tax-free, to kind of be able to help that spouse financially. And also, we're getting a little more big picture, and we did our 45th episode.
Wow.
Of this podcast. We had interviewed Dr. Wade Pfau, and what he had talked about is ways to manage or to increase that cash flow in retirement. And one way to do that is to combine, a lot of people have money in retirement assets, like 401ks or investments. If we have some permanent death benefit, that opens up a lot of options, different products and ways that we can maximize streams of income. And the case study we had shared in that episode is, without any sort of permanent death benefit or whole life, based on their assets, they could take $35,000 a year and feel comfortable they're not going to run out of money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But just by moving some assets, having that permanent death benefit, they were able to get $60,000 of income a year guaranteed. So $25,000 more, plus it's guaranteed. But again, that can only happen if we have some whole life.
I agree with you, right? I appreciate you touching on kind of that typical advice, which again doesn't really paint the whole picture, right? If you guys have an opportunity, go back, watch that episode that we had with Wade Pfau, and I think we even did a follow-up video with that volatility buffer, and where we look at the options that you can use the policy for in retirement, where you're focusing on the cash value, and then also even what kind of importance the death benefit plays in retirement as well. So hope you guys enjoyed this episode and have realized that no, you are not too old to start infinite banking. So hope you guys enjoy it.
Go make it a fantastic day.
Take care.
Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next episode. Also, check out our website, infinitewealthconsultants.com, to find our podcast along with other additional resources.